The average enterprise is using 44% of what they've purchased, 44% of the capabilities and features that they've purchased. When we're under attack, we buy defenses. And organizations have gone out and on average, they bought 52 security tools. Some of them talk to each other, some don't.
You've done two key things, right? You transitioned from IT into leadership and then specifically non-technical leadership. And then you immediately follow that up with a slew of acronyms that most non-technical leadership has any idea even exists, let alone what it means.
If company leaders recognize and accept that passwords were an amazing invention back in 1961, but now in 2026, they're the single biggest reason for all the breaches and hacks and compromises that happen. None of that AI investment is going into the on-prem legacy tools that were installed in the last century. And so the conclusion from that is
when I first saw the company, the branding Mobile Mentor, like the initial instantaneous association becomes cell phones and mobile devices. But that's not actually what Mobile Mentor is focused on and what you're focused on. So I'm going to give you a nice little soft intro. Can you give me a high level, what do you do? What's the focus? What was the inception thought for the business?
Max, that was not a soft opening easy question. It was actually probably the most incisive, painful question you could have asked me, because we're going through a whole rebrand at the moment and trying to figure out what our company name needs to be for the next 20 years rather than, what it was for the last 20. But thank you. Yes, the words Mobile Mentor do imply we work with mobile devices, which is partially true. We did nothing but mobile device technology work when we started the business. But it's evolved enormously. And now we work with a very wide range of technologies, mainly in the Microsoft ecosystem. But if I tell you a little bit about the backstory, it's quite interesting. I used to work for Nokia, selling cellular network infrastructure.
Okay.
I used to live in different countries around the world. And back in 2003, I was running Nokia's operation in Switzerland, and we lost a major sale to Orange. And the CEO of Orange said to me afterwards, said, why would I buy more technology from you guys when our customers are not yet using all the technology we bought from you last year? We spent hundreds of millions of euros. Customers are not using it. Why would I keep investing? And I came away from that conversation with my tail between my legs and really forced some introspection to figure out what needs to happen to drive adoption and consumption of all this new technology. And what was happening back then, if we go back 22 years or 23 years, people were running out and buying these new smartphones. And I use inverted commas to say smartphones because they actually weren't that smart, but they did have some capabilities. But most people were spending up to $1,000 or euros to buy this new smartphone. And all they were doing was sending text messages and making voice calls, because the mobile internet was a horrible experience. Setting up your email on one of those devices was very complex. You needed to know 2 different server addresses, an SMTP server and a POP3 server. Getting your calendar to sync was difficult. Transferring your contacts from your old phone to your new phone was difficult. Getting your music on it was insanely difficult. Everything was hard. And so what I did was I left Nokia. I'd been there 15 years and they were very good. They gave me some capital and their blessing. And I went and I built this business called Mobile Mentor to help drive adoption and consumption of the latest smartphone technology, one person at a time. And my strategy was very simple. It was to sit down with, could be someone like you who just got your first, say, Nokia or Sony Ericsson or Motorola device back in the day, sit down with you for 1 hour and get everything working. Get your email working, get your calendar syncing, transfer your contacts, get your music in there, all the things you needed. Just make you as an individual productive, and then maybe do it for your staff later and so on. And so taking these devices and helping people become super productive by really unlocking the full potential of the device. That was the basic, simple idea. And that's what Mobile Mentor was built to do. And we eventually scaled that service and deliver that one-on-one experience to 1 million people around the world. And that's really what got us going into the business we are in today. which has evolved enormously. You know, we've had pivots and transformations, and
Mhm.
technology has evolved. So we've adapted to follow. But yes, that's where the words came from. We were your mobile mentor, helping you unlock the full potential of your first smartphone.
I'm laughing because I understand the branding and naming pain. It just seems like when you find a good one and you see good ones, it's like, oh, that was so easy, it's so obvious. You're like, what went into that?
Yeah.
Scaling individual like one-on-one services, that is a really hard problem. And you talk about like configuration and device configuration. One of my notes I just wrote here was, I don't think people, if they weren't there, really understood like the birth of the BlackBerry and why BlackBerry
Yeah.
became such a big thing.
Yeah.
And part of it was just because he finally had a device that was really easy to roll out and utilize, right? Because like email, contacts, and calendar, and all of a sudden worked on your mobile device,
Yes.
and was reliable, and then was manageable. The corporate IT team could became responsible for it, and of course there
Yeah.
became like a executive pecking order of like, did you have the BlackBerry? Did you not have the BlackBerry? Who
Yeah.
got the Blackberries? These sorts of
Yeah.
things in the office.
Yeah. Very
But
much.
it's that the association I have, of course, is like that, reducing that friction.
Yeah.
BlackBerry rolled out really aggressively because it was usable. iPhone rolled out really aggressively. Apple, I think, has done a good job with the Genius Bar. People don't utilize it as much as they probably should, of being able to say,
Mm.
"Hey, I'm going to go sit down with somebody and like learn how
Yeah.
to use my Apple device." But
Yeah.
for the most part, that friction and that ease of use that barrier has changed, but then that introduces other problems, right? Because now you have a proliferation of devices across the enterprise.
Correct. Correct. And that's really what happened to us. We scaled up this operation. I think I had 250 staff in Brazil, China, Switzerland, UK, Japan, New Zealand, Australia, and we were running at a pace of about 10,000 of these one-on-one mentoring sessions every month. And that was all going gangbusters until the global financial crisis.
Mm.
And it came to a screaming halt. And a number of things changed around the same time. But I said to our board, we need to pivot now. And so we shifted from doing that one-on-one mentoring service to become a managed service provider in the mobile space. And what that meant was helping banks and hospitals and enterprises manage all the thousands of devices that they had now accumulated, and help them get their costs under control, help them design and build the first apps they wanted to roll out and connect back into their line of business applications, get some security on those devices. This was back in the early days of MDM, or mobile device management. Um, so we pivoted and we became a managed service provider, but just for mobile technology. So apps, security, cost control, asset management, user support, and we built service lines around those and aggregated them.
Any technology that has a consumer experience with it, so a cell phone, right? Like the average person has a cell phone and they have an experience with a cell phone. I find this becomes a huge double-edged sword, right? On the
Uh-huh.
one hand, it normalizes the technology for then the enterprise to want to have it, or the expectation that they should have it, because it's like, well, I have this personally, I should have this for
Yeah.
my business, right? But the requirements, this isn't like an N+1 issue, right? Where, as an enterprise rolls out a cell phone, what the enterprise has to do to maintain the cell phone is very different from what a personal experience is of
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, I've got my own cell phone plan, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like really simple, benign things of like, oh, just we have 1,000 lines, like we have to buy 1,000 phones and then roll them out to 1,000 people that are now, of course, in 1,000 different places.
Mm-hmm.
That introduces some different challenges. So,
Totally.
for people that are, walking into either rolling out phones for the first time or taking over, management and oversight, like you have a new executive that, somebody's been hired into a company and realizes, oh, we've got 2,000 cell phones. How do you help them go through that process and manage, these devices, and what's the word I'm looking for? What do they not know that they should know probably at this point?
So, firstly, I would say we have won some battles and lost some battles in this arena around
Mhm.
device management. I think we've got 14.5 million devices we have now enabled over the years we've been in business, on the managed service side of the house. And we deal a lot with organizations who try to go too far in managing their employees' devices and sometimes don't do enough to manage corporate owned devices. So let's draw a line there and say there's devices that employees went out and bought with their personal credit card, their after tax dollars. They own that device. It's a BYO device.
Mhm.
There's a management conversation around that. We'll park that over here. And then the other side is the organization has bought the devices, they're company owned.
Mhm.
The general recommendation and the advice I would give from all the hard lessons we've learned over the years is that those corporate owned devices should be fully managed by the organization with a full lockdown profile, pushing out the apps they want people to use, and limited capability to do a whole bunch of personal stuff on it, but limited. On the other hand, the personal devices should be unmanaged. And this is where we see organizations get in trouble when they try and impose too much management control on the employees' devices. And the technology now, in particular if you're using Microsoft Intune, which comes with Microsoft 365, if you're using that, you don't need to manage the device itself, but you can wrap some security around the applications and the data in the applications. So it's a much lighter way of providing security. You're not managing the device, but you're managing the apps and the data in the device. And that's the model we recommend for BYO.
So, okay, I've got like a whole spiraling list of questions I want to ask you and talk about. Right.
Yeah.
It's really easy for companies, especially when they're starting or they're small or scaling or startups, whatever, to go
Yeah.
into a BYO expense
Yeah.
policy. Okay,
Kind of
go
default.
buy. You already have your phone. We're just going to give you $100 a month, and this becomes your work phone, right?
Yeah.
And then we've got, you're talking about like corporate devices and corporate management, and then but there's like this middle ground that ends up happening by default with corporate devices that NIST coded COPE, right? Corporate owned, personally enabled devices, right? Because when
Yeah.
you have somebody, give somebody a cell phone, and that cell phone has the ability to access an app store and has a camera on it and has all these other utilities on it, and they can download Facebook or whatever else they want on it, TikTok. You now have a corporate owned device that has personal information that people have put on
Mm-hmm.
this device. And this
Mm-hmm.
also becomes like a really interesting thing in IT management. You give somebody a laptop, right? It's like a corporate
Yeah.
owned device, but it's a laptop now. Are they using it for all their stuff? And, over the decades, and you end up with these like really large, IT policy and procedure, handbook things that have to get executed and signed, right? But there's like like those three that like the horizon from BYO to complete corporate lockdown, people carrying two cell phones, right? Like there's no clear line with this for a company, but there are major pitfalls and problems across this entire spectrum. Like, you offboard an employee, and their default behavior is to go and wipe all their devices to eliminate everything from MDM. And it's like, oh, you just deleted a cell phone that has voicemails from their dead parents on it, and like, what do you do? Like how, and I've heard these stories, right? Like
Yeah.
pictures being deleted that were
Yeah.
sentimentally important to people
Yeah.
because,
Yeah.
MDM policy executes.
Yeah. You're right. Like there are many shades of gray in between those two paradigms, the full BYOD and the full corporate one. And that's why I said before, if you are doing a COPE model and allowing some personal use of the corporate device, that has to be limited. There's got to be some guardrails around that. But also, we generally recommend not managing the personal device and never
Mhm.
wiping someone's personal device, because the downstream implications of that. You gave one good example with the voicemails. There are many other examples.
Yeah.
And it doesn't end well generally. So we find that middle ground I mentioned, where we're managing the data and managing the applications, that's the right solution, leaving the device unmanaged. And then what that sets up, or what often precedes that, is a very clear policy statement to the employees to say, you bought this device, we respect your privacy, we're not going to manage it, we're not going to geo-track your location, we're not going to be able to see what personal apps you have on your device, we're not going to be able to see your messages or your social media or anything like that, but we absolutely unconditionally must protect our company information. We must protect our customer data, anything that's in emails, any attachments or files. We have to protect that. And if your device gets lost or goes in for repair, or you want to pass it on to your kids when you get a new one, we'll simply remove the company applications. It might be Outlook and Teams and OneDrive and SharePoint, whatever. We'll remove those, but all your personal stuff stays, all your photos and your music and Tinder, whatever you've got. You keep you. You do you. We're just going to remove the corporate information. So
People do some
all
really
happy.
weird stuff with devices. If you say so the cell phones are getting a little better about giving you the ability to have profiles and containers and like effectively like partitions within the phone. And because you start talking about like protecting customer, company data, like
Yeah.
what are you really worried about, right? You're worried about a couple of different, like major scenarios. I mean, you're worried about lots of things. Let me back that statement up. But what are the scenarios people talk about, right? They're talking about, a threat actor or something getting access to your corporate data and then exfiltrating it, right? So like you have data on a cell phone that people can access or another app can access and then download. And then you've got the inverse of that, which is something jumping the gap from an unprotected network or an unprotected device, then infecting your corporate data, and being destructive as well. I mean, again, there's so many more, there's so many more than those two examples, but let's just stick with that. And this I find becomes a big trade-off within a company, right? Because now you're battling directly against ease of use and let's say like friendliness, in terms of your employees and your users using your infrastructure versus restrictions, like any level of protection becomes restrictions. It's like, oh, you can do this, you can't do that. Like you're now you're restricting, and and the some organizations, banks, approach this really tightly to begin with. It's just like, oh, sorry, everything's locked down, period. It's just bank policy, right?
Yeah.
But then you have other organizations that I feel, it's like, it seems like they start at zero and then bad things happen and they kind of like ratchet up after every bad thing that happens. And it's like, how many bad things do you have to have happen in a row before you just kind of get to a better place?
Yeah. And look, we live at this intersection of security and employee experience. We're constantly, we use an infinity symbol diagram to show this never-ending tension between security and employee experience. And because it's always changing, it's an infinite loop. And the best way to explain that is if we keep talking about mobile devices, I think the average mobile device has 92 apps. Okay. They all get an update about once a month, which means there's probably 3 app updates happening every day. So you're using that device at work. It's connected to your corporate Wi-Fi. You've probably got email and Teams and other stuff on it. You're introducing new code to your work environment every day because there are apps updating that nobody looked at, nobody vetted them. There's just new things happening on that device that's connected to your network. So you as an individual are bringing new security considerations to the work environment every day. And then the IT team is doing everything they can to protect the organization. So they're applying new policies, and all the vendors whose products are in the environment are applying updates and new policies. And every one of those is going to somehow have an impact on the end user experience, right? Because the end user goes to click on something and used to work yesterday. It doesn't work today because there's a new conditional access policy or whatever. So this infinite loop goes on forever and ever. It never stops changing. Every day it's changing. How we navigate that, how we manage that is the art in IT. Truly believe that's the art. The science is, being able to apply good policies and propagate them and all that. The art is getting that balance right so that we're not alienating the end users. We're not making IT seem like the villain. We're working together to protect the organization, protect the personal information, whether PII or PHI or student data or citizen data. We're protecting the data together and trying to do so in a way that we're not encroaching on the privacy of the person who owns the device.
Pros and cons, BYO versus corporate owned, right? Like it's easy just to say, hey, we're going to expense your cell phone for you and give you,
easy, super easy,
give you some money on your paycheck every month. But Is that just a bad idea?
And I would say, no, it's not, as long as mobile application management is in place and there's at least a degree of protection around the corporate data. Now, that model worked very well for most organizations up until I think it was November 2024. So you could simply say, we'll either manage the device if it's corporate owned, or we'll manage the apps if it's personally owned. The big shift that happened in November 2024 was the Digital Markets Act legislation in Europe. You're nodding sagely, like you've fought this battle. And for those who are not aware of it, it's a bit like GDPR. It's a European thing. You can kind of think, oh, those Euros created this new legislation. It won't impact us. Well, guess what? GDPR found a way of swimming across the Atlantic and impacting every US business and global businesses. Yeah. The DMA, the Digital Markets Act, will learn how to swim the Atlantic too. And what the DMA did is it forced Apple to open up the ability for end users to sideload apps onto their iPhones. So we lived in this beautiful walled garden for about 15 years, where every app developer had to go through Apple to get their app scrutinized and vetted. And Apple did a stunning job in pushing back on all the dodgy apps and only allowing good apps onto the App Store with a certificate and get it properly signed and all that. So you knew that if you saw an app somewhere and it came from the Apple App Store, it was probably a legit, solid app. You never had that assurance in the Android ecosystem, but you always had that assurance in the Apple ecosystem. The Europeans, in their wisdom, forced Apple to permit sideloading so that an iPhone buyer in Europe can choose to get their apps from an app store other than Apple. So essentially unbundling that relationship. And what that means now is you might be a doctor here in the States, you see an interesting looking app advertised in social media, you think that looks like a useful thing, I'll download that and I'll install that. You click I agree and consent, and you give the developer full consent to do whatever they like. And it might start out as a perfectly benign app, perfectly benign. But you just granted control to somebody other than Apple, to a developer. You don't know where that person is. You didn't read the T's and C's. And now that app can drift. And over time, it may drift into dangerous territory where it's potentially becoming a kind of a surveillance device. It could be taking data from your device, uploading that data to servers overseas. It might be logging your keystrokes and capturing any passwords. It might be turning on the microphone, capturing ambient conversations. It might be turning on the camera and it might be capturing your geolocation. So it becomes a device that can harvest data from your life. And this is very real. And the Digital Markets Act opens up about, I think it was 7 new threat vectors, man-in-the-middle attacks, and a whole bunch of other things that I can't remember now. And so I like to draw a line and say November 24 was the turning point where we went from only needing mobile device management and mobile app management to now needing a third layer of mobile security, which is called mobile threat management. So it sits well above device management, which will not pick up, a dodgy app that has permissions that drift over time. App management will only protect apps like, the Microsoft apps or any app where you apply something like the Intune SDK. Now we're having to have this threat defense tool that can pick up a man-in-the-middle attack or inappropriate permissions or an app that's calling APIs that we might not like. If we're saving stuff to a Dropbox account or some servers in China or in Moscow, whatever. The ability to pick up on those things and then raise a flag and say, this behavior is changing and looks dodgy.
For the record, I'm really unhappy with Apple over this because, DMA is a response to bad behavior inside of Apple.
Monopolistic behavior.
Yeah, like the whole App Store rules, 30% payment fee, like all these different things. I'm not saying that there's so much more nuance to this conversation with that I don't want to get into, right? But there was lots of opportunity for Apple a long time along the way to make changes that would have staved this off. And instead they decided to dig their heels in and whatever. And it almost is like, as a company, they couldn't change direction internally. They wanted some external force to force it to change. It was almost like, like this weird thing. It's this is one of those fun things where it's like, I appreciate what DMAS Force, and I appreciate what Epic has done in order to force an opening of this environment, because what was happening was so bad. And I'm not upset with, and now like unintended consequences are going to come, and they're going to be really painful, and we're all going to pay the price for it. And I'm not upset with the people that have forced the opening of these unintended consequences. I'm really upset with Apple for like just being so bad for so long. It really is how I put it. But mobile threat management has, okay. MDM, I love this, because you had MDM, and then now everybody wants to call it UEM based on what the thing is, because we needed a new term so we could separate the market, yada, yada, yada. Normal tech marketing bullshit. So MDM is a relatively easy, straightforward thing, right? Which is just, you want to have an efficient, lean IT staff, and you want to be able to do device management, and you want to be able to do app rollout, and you want to do it globally, and you want to do it very efficiently, right? And so your power law of like, originally when I started in IT, we had this like 1 IT to 60 employee like ratio, right? Now you can have these ratios get like really high because we have technologies like MDM and UEM and RMM and the ability to actually go out and manage a fleet of devices is so much more effective. Also, the experience of being able to ship a phone to somebody and having zero touch configuration, where like a phone comes in the box from a manufacturer, and you can open the device up at your house on your couch and push a button, it turns on, it can auto enroll. It's magic. It's beautiful.
And same with a laptop now, or a Mac.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. It's wonderful. After you've experienced it, you can't imagine life doing anything else, right? So that has there's a direct value proposition within that, right? Because you understand it's like, it's time, it's resources, it's staffing, right? It's like an easy, hey, if you're trying to do this by hand, it sucks. It sucks. You're doing it by hand right now. You can't scale it. Go get MDM, go get UEM, and look, your life is better. Mobile threat management is this interesting thing for me, because once we start dipping into a security conversation, you get into these really fuzzy things where traditional purchasing acronyms like ROI no longer apply. Like, what is the ROI on threat management for an enterprise? Like, we're going to monitor the applications that get installed and their data telemetry to see what's going where, and then be able to retroact, to block it if it's looking fishy, right? But like, that's not an ROI positive activity that you can put on a spreadsheet and say, we installed MTM, and so therefore it saved us this much money, or we installed MTM and it saved us this much time, or we installed MTM and we got this extra capacity and we made money out of it, right? So how do you position MTM into an enterprise that's not dealing with like, something bad happened to us that we don't want to experience again?
I generally position exactly the same as EDR. So there's no direct ROI in having an endpoint detection response agent on your Windows machine, but you need to have it. You just need to have it. You could not have a Windows machine now that is not encrypted and doesn't have EDR and doesn't have some form of management. We need to have that, because we know there's a ton of 0 days and all sorts of vulnerabilities coming, and all the applications need to be patched. And
I agree with you, but I'm going to push back in terms of the conversation. Like, why? Most companies deploy EDR because somebody tells them they have to deploy EDR. Your insurance requires you to have EDR. Like your supply chain, your customer requires you to have EDR. Customers aren't requiring MTM yet. Insurance companies aren't requiring MTM yet.
They're not.
So.
But in the same way that people are requiring EDR, there's an expectation and a legit need for EDR. because the Windows environment it's the Windows estate worldwide is so large, it's a massive target for a whole bunch of AI enabled vectors now.
Mhm.
And so, we need to have an EDR agent on every Windows device, period. We just need to have it. If we don't, the ROI, the lack of that will be measured in breaches, the cost of breaches and claims and all of that. So I feel like the argument for EDR is super strong. We simply extend that and saying, if you're going to have the same emails flowing into your smartphone as you have into your laptop, and the access to the same calendars and the same contacts and the same attachments in your emails and the same teams and the same folders and the same OneDrive content, why would you secure one device, your Windows, and not secure your iOS or your iPad device that's got access to the same information? So we need to secure all the devices.
I mean, the cynical side of it for me is just because people haven't experienced breaches on their phones yet.
You're
And
right.
so therefore they look at it as an unnecessary expense.
Yeah. We had an interesting one yesterday. I had two people in the organization contact me and say, "Hey, did you text me from this number?" I'm like, "No." So later in the day, I had to send out an email to all staff, notifying them, I will never text you and ask you to go out and buy vouchers or gift cards or whatever. And we had not turned on something called executive smishing on our mobile threat defense, but we did yesterday. And so it's an AI capability that will detect messages that look like they've come from an exec asking people to do something or take some action,
Yeah.
and being able to detect the patterns across many different devices to see what's going on and then mitigate them or remove them before they land. So that's another really interesting vector, executive smishing.
It's a very common threat vector in email, right? So we talk about
Yeah.
impersonation, protection, and detection. Like it's an exceedingly common, and they're really good, by the way. The phone number is a little bit easier because in theory they can look at the phone number and be like, this
Don't
isn't the phone
recognize that.
number.
Yeah.
Yeah. It gets really scary with email because the email is correct. If you've
Yeah.
compromised the email server, it is coming from the right email, right? So like
Yeah.
it's even scarier. I mean, like it's you talk about like the infinity loop within IT and like
Mhm.
this, this friction between I mean, you started with like security and employee experience, right? But it's really this friction between like the responsibilities of IT and employees, right? And that intersection, right, of those two. Because, in a lot of ways, if IT could have its choice, which is, you have to keep everything running or you're going to get yelled at / lose your job.
Yeah.
Like you put everybody in like a box that's not connected to anything, and it's just like a box in a room that you have to walk in, like Mission
Dear
Impossible,
God.
like your key
Yeah.
card. Yeah, of course, right? Like that'd be like the natural response. Be like, okay, great, you want to use a computer? It's in that room. You need a retinal scan in order to get it in there. But it creates, again, it's like the consumerization of enterprise has created expectations that are unrealistic for IT. Like I had a client and they were moving into this beautiful new office space. It was a 50,000 square foot floor plate. It's like a big office. So there lots of room for expansion. They just took in a very sizable round of funding, and they were planning for hyper growth, right? It was a typical, we were this many people and we're going to quadruple in size over the next 2 years, right? Let's go. And this, the co-founder and CTO was had no corporate background experience, came basically straight out of like a college environment, like a hacker kind of kind of thing. When I say hacker, like not like software, like security hacker, but
Yeah.
your traditional like Facebook hacker.
Yeah.
And we're in a conversation, we're talking about this office build out, and he says to me that he just wants it to be all wireless like it is at his house.
Mm-hmm.
It works fine at my house. We should have 0 wires in our new office. And then like I realized that I had this reflection at this point. I was like, well, I don't know how to explain to you the density differences. I mean, I can walk you through it, but until you experience this, you're just not going to have any reference point with it. You want to put, a lot of people in this space, everybody's going to have 3 to 4 devices. Your density per AP is going to be ridiculous. Like it's just not going to work the same. Like I'm sorry. Like it just doesn't. Things are different in the real world. But this becomes a big problem and a big challenge now. Of like, it should just work. It works fine for me in my personal account.
And we're seeing this play out now, in the AI arena, where it's super interesting watching organizations. Again, it's the infinity loop between the experience you can have on your home computer with an unmanaged LLM, no guardrails, doing all the things you can do with AI, and then what you get as a corporate AI solution that does have guardrails, that is grounded in your tenant, that does have some data security posture management, that does have a limited set of things that can do. It's a different experience. And, we have a lot of conversations with customers now that the meeting starts and they say, Copilot sucks. That's often the opening statement. And so we then have to kind of unpack that and figure out, right, so what's actually going on here? And one of the examples I gave one of our healthcare clients recently was, if you go down to Best Buy, you buy a new Windows machine, you take it out of the box, and you start using that with your personal email account and ChatGPT and whatever, you're just going to have a fantastic experience, right? Fantastic. The Windows machine that you would put into a clinical workspace in a hospital is going to have the most god-awful experience you could ever imagine, because we've spent 20 years designing all the controls and lockdowns, and we put Improvada on it. And you've probably got a virtualization session. You're coming in over Citrix to access your EMR. You've got so many layers of control, so many guardrails, that it's nothing like the experience you would have at home with a Windows device. It's still the same Windows device with the same CPU and blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. But you've just rendered it in a way that it's actually safe to use with a person's most sensitive and personal information in a hospital setting. And I liken the Copilot thing that's happening now in the same way. You could take ChatGPT 5.4 or whatever the latest one is, and if you just allow that to run wild inside organizations, that's going to be like having unmanaged Windows devices. But what's happened, of course, is Microsoft have applied some controls and guardrails and adult supervision and limited the risk and exposure. So it's almost now like using a Windows machine in a clinical setting and providing some guardrails around that.
So Microsoft's done a really good job with 365 and like sucking all the air out of the room. As
you mean Microsoft 365 or Copilot?
Microsoft 365, so yeah. Like, now we're calling it Intra, and then Intune and Defender and Sentinel, that like,
Purview. Yeah.
The stack is getting denser and denser now. Our European friends are forcing some changes, which Microsoft will work around with new bundles and different terminology and things like that. Is there still a place for I'm a really old Windows guy, like really, really old Windows guy. So the things that like are always odd to me is I'm going to pay Microsoft for the EDR to secure the Microsoft product. I'm going to pay Microsoft for the anti-spam gateway to secure the email product. I'm going to pay Microsoft for so like there's always like a certain bit of friction in me that just goes back because I've been dealing with this for 3 decades now, that like just, some things I'm just probably never going to let go. But when you look at the MDM space, or the MDM, UEM, whatever we want to call it, space, there's a lot of other product on the market, but a lot of this other product is competing now with Intune, which is being bundled with 365. So if you're a Windows environment and you're looking at like, do I just use Intune, or do I use Intune plus these other things, or do I use another thing instead? Is there still space in the market for third parties to be for third parties? Now the MTM is interesting because that hasn't completely integrated into the Microsoft suite. There's still good product around there.
Not at all.
But how does this shake out?
So first, we don't see Microsoft as having a credible play in the mobile threat management space. They might tell you that Defender will do some other things, but in our opinion, there are other tools that are better. Lookout, Zimperium, Wandera. Some of these are better. But when it comes to MDMs, look, my view is that there will be sustainable niches for some other endpoint vendors in particular corners of the market. So Jamf will probably always retain a loyal fan base of evangelists who just love Jamf to manage their school MacBooks or whatever. They've built phenomenal loyalty in their customer base. It's extraordinary. SOTI will probably always have a very strong position with supply chain, logistics, retail front of house, inventory back of house type applications where you need to go deep into an Android device, be able to pull logs out of a custom application, stuff like that. They do things that Intune and other mainstream products can't do. AirWatch have such huge market share. AirWatch, which became Workspace ONE, which became Omnissa, they've got such huge market share. They'll survive a long time, even though the product is aging. But all the others we think are gone. They're as good as gone. And we think the market will eventually. My personal view is I think the mobile device management market, as we have talked about it for the last 16 years, I believe it's going to disappear. It's just going to disappear as a category, completely be annihilated. In the same way that we really don't have any category for desktop operating software. Microsoft has dominated that space and the category is gone. We don't have a competitive market for word processing applications or things that compete with Excel or PowerPoint, except with the Apple products. But what Microsoft tend to do over time is invest enormously into a product, make it so big that it dominates the market. And that will happen with Intune. And we've enjoyed maybe 10 years now where we've done a ton of work helping organizations deploy Intune and migrate off Jamf and AirWatch and Mobile Iron and SOTI into Intune. I believe that market comes to an end. That business comes to an end at some point when most of the endpoints are on Intune. There's still a huge wave with SCCM. That's most of the work we're doing now, where you've got people who still have some AD on-prem. They still have some SCCM on-prem. They're still doing some manual provisioning, maintaining images, maintaining packages, all the legacy way of doing it from the last century. That all does need to go into a product like Intune and go zero touch, zero deployment, silent updates, all of that. Hasn't happened yet, and some are moving surprisingly slowly because they've got technical dependencies. But once that's done, I believe the device management spaces that we know will become boring and almost insignificant. We will just assume that the device is managed by Intune because most organizations have Microsoft, to your point, they have Microsoft 365. So why wouldn't you use Intune? And all the focus and all the energy and all the conversation and goes to, the next battle.
I mean, Microsoft owns, let's just, if we stick with enterprise, right? Microsoft effectively owns the space, right? We're seeing, it's very common now actually to see Mac laptops. People love MacBooks, right?
Yep.
So
love them.
With Microsoft applications running on them, common with our clients, we see Mac laptops with Google Workspace.
Yeah.
Which still means iPhones, not Androids, typically accessing Google services. I've always been a big fan of Chromebooks. Google's announced a strategy shift on that one. They're going to push towards Android. Thing that people don't really understand with Chromebooks is the management's really basic, right? Like you're pushing a PWA down, and you can get device management inside a Chrome Enterprise. You just in your console, you just click the button, you enable it. And so the devices, of course, Chrome comes from a place of when they were writing the operating system and deploying it initially, they were thinking about fleet management at massive scale because, they'd already understood this was a problem. Windows comes from a legacy of that wasn't a thing that you dealt with. You walked around with floppy disks and you put them in your computers and you did work on them, right? the tension that this creates that I opens up another part of it, which is, the platform ecosystem inside of the Microsoft environment, right? You've got Microsoft in the middle, M365 in the middle, you've got enterprises running the software in the middle, and you have ISVs writing software on, to run on your Microsoft environment, and then you have MSPs or CSPs or whatever we're going to be called in a year or two, orchestrating and and making all this stuff actually work. But that runs into the second, like, this idea of like, oh, well, I can just go out and hire a Microsoft admin and they're going to be able to manage Intra for me. Or I'm going to go out and hire a Microsoft admin. They're going to be able to deploy Intune for me. Like, that, they should know how to do it. They're my Microsoft person, right? Now, I alluded to this. I started my career helping deploy Windows NT 4 and Exchange 5.0 into enterprises from Novell, right? So, like, I know the answer to this question to some degree, my viewpoint of the answer. But how much tension does that produce inside an enterprise and inside of your customer base as you're talking to them, of having like, oh, we're going to run Intune, it's easy, we just have to turn it on, it's in the Microsoft console?
I would say first, the vision is right, but the execution is much harder than it sounds, and it's not as easy as it looks. So yes, you can manage all your devices on Intune, and many organizations do that now. But Intune has grown into an enormous product to be able to do that. So, 14 years ago, when Intune really came out first, it was a dog of a product. It did one thing, it did Windows badly. It was a dog of a product. Now, it's a very mature product. It does Windows and Macs and Chromebooks and Linux boxes and smartphones and a whole bunch of things, does them well, but it's become an enormous product. And I know for a fact, before they added all the new capabilities in December, Intune already had 10,000 unique settings. 10,000. So if you're a solitary IT admin in a mid-sized company and you say, I'm going to do a DIY with Intune, I'm going to figure it out myself, and I'm going to basically test and figure out every one of these settings and figure out what the impact is. Well, there goes 10,000 hours. And that's if the product was static. It's not static. Microsoft is pushing new updates at a crazy pace. And so Intune alone is a beast of a product that's changing it at the same pace as all the endpoints that it has to manage. Because, Samsung and Apple and everybody else and Lenovo and Dell, they're all innovating with their hardware and their OS and their firmware and their drivers and their whole stacks. And so in the Intune product line, and I know this because I've been on the advisory board for the Intune product line for a couple of years, they're scrambling to keep up with all the external changes. And then they're trying to add AI capability into everything they do and add all these new capabilities. So Intune is one tiny piece of Microsoft 365. Now apply that same paradigm to Entra, which has become a monster. Entra and the way it's growing with Entra Suite to become the zero trust plane and the control plane for AI agents, that's an enormous product. And in fairness, Microsoft have realized that as AI agents explode inside organizations, every one of them will need to be registered and have some conditional access policies and have some governance around which APIs it can call and which data stores it can access and how it will pull data from different line of business applications. And so Entra is going to become a monster. Defender is already a monster. 29 Defender products. People only know about 4 usually. Cloud apps, endpoint, Office, and identity. There are 29 Defender products. Purview is colossal because that's how we have to classify and add sensitivity labels to our data, so that when people do a search with an LLM, they're not finding things they shouldn't find. We're hopefully having some sensitivity labels to our data so that a draft offer letter that got written 2 years ago and saved on somebody's desktop doesn't pop up in an LLM search, or a draft performance improvement letter doesn't show up, or a spreadsheet with some salary up data. So Purview, and the point I'm getting to, Purview is a monster. All these different parts of the Microsoft estate are colossal. And what Microsoft is doing is they're choking them all into this one bundle. And I see that what they've done over the last 50 years is they've learned how to bundle more technology into a package and a single price point than anybody else. They've become masters of the bundle. And it's just colossal. And we often start our customer work with an assessment, and we go through 120 topics to figure out what are you using today
Do you
in
even
the
know what you're
Microsoft
using
stack,
today?
and do you know what you're using, and how much of these products are you using, and what overlapping products are you using as well. And I know from all that data, because we've been doing this for years, that on the average enterprise is using 44% of what they've purchased, 44% of the capabilities and features that they've purchased. But they're also using 44% of other overlapping products. So there's a massive opportunity in enterprise today to reduce some of the tech sprawl that's happened. And I believe what's happened over the last 10, 12 years is that organizations were under attack. People, there's been a lot of press around all the growth and cyber attacks and all the things happening. And when we're under attack, we buy defenses. And organizations have gone out and on average, they bought 52 security tools. 52. Some of them talk to each other, some don't. Most are designed to be silos, and protect what they do and not share it with other tools. And I liken it to, if you think about Ukraine and their defense systems, how many aerial defense systems do you think Ukraine has accumulated by now? I bet you it's at least 52, because they will buy a missile defense system from anybody who comes along selling them one, because they're under attack.
Mm-hmm.
And just like our enterprise has been under attack from bad actors for the last 10 years, we all accumulated a truckload of security products. And it's been this kind of best of breed mentality. I think the next wave we're going to see now will be consolidation and figuring out what's best of platform. How do we get the best integration across tools? How do we get a platform that allows AI to reason across all the signals, all the telemetry, all the tooling we've got, make sense of it, and protect us without needing techs that are doing swivel chair integration and looking at this screen and that screen and this screen and trying to pull data and aggregate it and figure out what actually happened and what should we do next. I think the next wave is getting a platform that allows the data to flow, aggregate it in a lake, and allow AI to reason over it and make real-time decisions that humans can't.
Excluding a willingness to pay, what qualifies a customer for you? Like what is a what's the inflection point where somebody wakes up one day and says, I need help with this, or this is the service I need, or I have a problem or a gap here. What's the impetus that drives people to go and find a partner, an MSP partner to deploy Intune? Or, is this we've woken up and we've decided we want to rip out Jamf and we want to go into Intune because we realize we have overlap of tools, and we don't have Intune expertise now? Or is it we've tried to deploy it ourselves and it was a mistake and we never, the amount of times that we walk into an environment, we find we bought something and we never really deployed it. I would imagine that is the overwhelming majority of all software packages inside the enterprise. Is like, oh,
yeah,
we and, and anything in the security space is even worse, right? Because it's just it's not creating a value accretive ROI for the, it's like, oh, you don't see the output from it, I guess, in terms of like the performance of the business.
Yeah. So to answer your question, I think it's usually because something or somebody has changed in the customer's organization. So the thing might be the realization that we have a renewal coming up in 12 months' time, and we don't want to renew that thing. So it might be Jamf, to your point. It might be AirWatch. It might be a third-party storage solution. It might be a third-party security product. It might be their SOC vendor. And they go, we're now going to look to see what are our options. And so quite often they'll say to Microsoft, we just want to consider options. Who should we talk to? And then, hopefully Microsoft would say, here are 2 or 3 partners that you could talk to. So that's often a starting point. The other starting point is recognition that they're missing automation. What I often see happen is somebody goes to a conference, they have a coffee with somebody else who makes some comment like, well, we haven't touched or seen a Windows machine for 3 years. They get drop shipped to the employee's home. the employee has an autopilot, zero touch experience,
Mhm.
and the device gets updated for 3 years. And then at the end of 3 years, we just push out a wipe command and the person gives it to their kid or they sell it on eBay. We never see it. We're not in the business of handling Windows machines anymore.
Mhm.
And the other person is going, oh shit, we've still got a stack of boxes in the corner of the office. And we take them all out of the box and we spend 2 hours putting our dirty fingers all over it and laying down an image and updating the OS and installing packages. And then we
It's
sit
so
down with the
common.
user and we reset the password and we do all this stuff from the last century. And that conversation will then force them to go, oh my God, we need to automate provisioning and patching and deployment and end of life and the 5 lifecycle processes. So, that conversation can be very powerful. That happens at a trade show or a conference. That's one trigger. Another one's a bad one is where a client goes through an audit and they get a report that says, here are the gaps, or they've been breached. And the board says, you've got 90 days to sort this out. Or in one of our recent ones, they got breached for the second time. And the board said, you've got 90 days to keep your jobs. When this cannot happen a third time. And they're like, okay, we need to get real now and figure out what do we need to do to, change this. So to answer your question, I'd say it's a renewal, a product, an overlapping product they don't want to renew, or recognition that they're doing things manually that could be eliminated or automated. Or third, reaction to a post-audit report or a post-breach remediation action plan.
This show exists because of what we do at itbroker.com. If you're in the middle of a real tech decision right now, new technology, vendor selection, a contract that doesn't feel right, an M&A event that just landed on your lap, and so on, we help buyers like you get it right. Independent strategy, sourcing, and contract negotiation. No kickbacks, no sales quotas, just someone in your corner. Schedule a call at itbroker.com. Back to the episode. The Europeans, have signaled that they're interested in breaking up this bundle.
Yeah.
And they started with Teams.
Yeah.
And I would imagine it's going to go deeper than Teams, which, effectively, it seems like the remedy was you have to separate items from the bundle and then give a la carte pricing to purchase individually, right? So then we end up with an even bigger spreadsheet Chinese menu of it's going to be E1 to E57,000 here pretty soon, in terms of just different pricing combinations, right? Bless the Europeans' hearts here on this nightmare that they're creating for us.
Be careful because I'm European, Max. Yeah.
I love you guys, but like, listen, I appreciate that everything has to be USB-C right now, but I'm not sure if I want to have a USB-C connector for the rest of my life. There's not something better out there that we could use instead,
It'll all go wireless.
My as my mom told me, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. But you look, we talk about we hit Defender a little bit. Microsoft has their SIEM platform Sentinel, and again, mostly good, right?
Yeah,
better. It's better. It's more good than it is bad.
Yeah.
But there's a little tweak with Sentinel, which is if you're collecting data off of Windows devices with Defender, they're not charging for that ingress, right? And that makes a pretty massive pricing evaluation when you're looking at another EDR going to a different SIEM platform, right? Like it's like the biggest component of cost for your SIEM is just how much data are you ingressing.
Correct.
And good. Microsoft's really smart. Like, we just going to eliminate that from the consideration. There is no cost, right? But does this create a bad situation for us down the road where you're going to talk about, you're eliminating competition through, good/bad behavior. Yeah. And what does that do for us long term?
And it's interesting that the Europeans are pushing in one direction to unbundle the stack, and Microsoft is basically flipping the bird and going the opposite direction with the announcement of E7, where the bundle just
is back a
whole lot bigger. And we sent out an email last week informing clients on the change, and the subject line was E7 is here, but wait till you see E9. And it was just a tongue-in-cheek thing. But I've had quite a few comments about it since then. Um, but E7 is going to be extraordinary. You can buy all the component parts individually. It's Entra Suite and the 5 capabilities in there around zero trust and identity governance and verified identity, and Agent 365, which is going to become huge. We will need a control plane to manage all the agents that get built out across organizations. Microsoft's taking the lead, and they're going to do that first. And they're going to make it a control plane, just like Entra is the control plane for identity. Intune is the control plane for endpoints. Agent 365 becomes the control plane for the mushroom cloud of agents that's about to happen inside every organization. And that's included in E7. And that's smart. The Europeans might not like it, but it actually makes a ton of sense.
It's a little it's misleading, right? Because it's like, oh, it's bundled. I can buy this whole thing. E5 was $50 a seat or whatever, right? And we're going to give you this capability, and it's what, pick a number. It's gonna be $70 a seat for everything. $99 a seat
for E7.
And the pricing will come up and down, right? Like all these things. And but you look at these things individually, and you're like, the capabilities within, Intune or Intra or Defender, each one of these things is really a multi-billion-dollar business inside of 365.
Correct.
And this is, and so like it's this weird thing where you're like, oh, it's bundled, it's $100 a user, it's not that big of a deal. But then, as you've pointed out, like there's a little bit of buttons that you can push inside of each one of these tools. And do you even know that the buttons exist, right? Because it's like, oh, we turned it on. And you're like, okay, great. What does that mean for you? You're like, we turned on Intro, we turned on Defender. You're like, okay, great. Now what? You flipped the lights.
Which of the 10,000 settings did you turn on? And what impact did you have? And what's actually going on for your end users when they're trying to work every day?
So we started this conversation talking about MDM, and listening to you, right? We've gotten into really more into the Microsoft stack, MDM, identity intra, Defender security. Right now, they all apply, right? I mean, if we were going to say specific just to mobile and laptops, laptops are mobile devices, right? They all layer and apply, but that does make a really big shift for your business. I mean, going forward, are you going to be less like a mobile consultancy and more of a Microsoft enablement consultancy managed services provider?
I see it through a different lens. I see that our business hasn't changed at all because we're in the people business. Mm-hmm. Tech is simply a tool that we need to use. So we define our mission as empowering people to achieve more with technology. But for us, it's all about the people. And when we started out doing those one-on-one mentoring sessions, we developed, through the work we did, we developed this enormous empathy for the end user and their experience with technology. Because we literally sat with people on the same side of the desk for an hour in their personal space, helping them get this small little device configured. And we got a really good understanding of what are the triggers to adoption and what are the barriers to adoption. So I feel like the DNA of Mobile Mentor is understanding people's relationship with technology. The technology will evolve. It'll just keep evolving at a crazy pace. So I don't define us by the tech we're working with today. I define us by the outcomes we deliver for the end user. And so in some ways, the business hasn't changed at all. But we've used different tech to achieve the outcomes. It was a smartphone, then it was apps, then it was Windows and MacBooks and all the Microsoft 365 stuff, and now building, rolling out AI at scale and building agents and security solutions. I don't know what it's going to look like in 4 or 5 years' time. I don't know what tech we're going to be spending most of our time with. But what I do know for certain is that it's going to be in service of the moments that matter for the employee. When they join an organization, what their setup experience is like, when they go to do something, when they go to use their endpoint, when they go to apply an update, all the moments that matter throughout the life cycle of the employee. We're going to enable those with the technology du jour, whatever the technology happens to be. And hopefully we will be, still a leading Microsoft partner, winning Partner of the Year awards and recognized for good skills in those technologies. but that's just getting us to the table to be able to do the work we do to enable the end user.
So I perceive a let's call it like a two-step problem for you, right? Like there's the first step problem, which is the DIY, the build versus buy decision for an enterprise, right? Are we going to try to figure this out ourselves and staff, or we think we know way how to do this ourselves?
Yeah.
And I actually view that as like a maturity thing. You know, you can kind of really see it where it's like if you don't have a lot of experience with things, you try to do it yourself, and then the more experience you have, the less you want to do yourself.
Yeah.
So so there's like the first half of that, and then the second half of it, the effective barrier to label yourself a Microsoft partner or a Microsoft consultant or a Microsoft expert is relatively low. You know, now like in terms of the actual tiering within the program partner, you know, the partner program with Microsoft, and you know, they do a good job of like differentiating, you know, like how much credentials you have and what kind of staff you have and what your expertises are and what different swim lanes you're in, like all these different things. But you know, like an average company going out and looking for somebody to say, hey, I've decided I want help. Now I have to figure out who's going to help me, you know, and a lot of times it's like, oh, you know, I'm like this company's down the street from me and that's who I'm using. And they say that they can secure my environment. And, you know, I get in these conversations with companies all the time. They're like, oh, we're a managed security services provider. And you're like, okay, great. How many people do you have on team that are you know, experts in this? They're like, we have, you know, our team is 9 people and we have 3 people in security. And I'm like, here we can stop having this conversation right now. We don't have to go any farther. But that becomes a second part now for the enterprise. The enterprise has to decide, okay, do we build versus buy? Do we, you know, DIY? Do we bring in a partner? And then it's like, okay, how do you figure out which partner you're bringing in now? And then this gets a little even messier because there's a lot of capital investment, you know, PE partners coming in, doing roll-ups, creating platforms, trying to capitalize because they look at this thing and go, man, there's a $1 trillion TAM here, you know, in a decade. Mm-hmm. You know, like how do we go get our slice of this? And which creates problems as well for the enterprise. Like how is an enterprise buyer supposed to figure out and navigate those two questions? But really the second question let's focus on.
And the second question being how to find the right partner for the work
Correct.
that needs to be done.
Yeah.
I would say ask around. If it's a 9-person organization down the road, or you know the CEO through your church, whatever, that's useful and interesting. But really, I think asking Microsoft who are the leading partners with this particular workload, and using that language with this particular workload, because you know people come to us all the time and say, we're moving from Salesforce to Microsoft Dynamics. Can you help us? And we go, hell no. We are absolutely not your partner for anything to do with Dynamics. And hopefully there are Dynamics partners who get the same question and say, could you help us deploy Entra and or Intune or Defender? And hopefully they're saying hell no to that as well. Microsoft have 400,000 partners. 400,000. So it's an extraordinarily difficult task to get their attention and stand out above the crowd. Mm-hmm. It's incredibly difficult. But the partners who achieve that recognition generally do it because they've executed well for a long period of time. And hopefully they get known by Microsoft so that if you go to them and say, hey, I need to do a big SharePoint cleanup, who would you recommend? That they'll go, okay, we know a great partner who can do that thing. They've been around for a long time. That's their expertise. Or we need to do, you know, endpoint consolidation and modernization. Who's the right partner for that? So I would say talk to Microsoft. They're going to know who's who in the zoo. They'll know the top partners from experience.
The last time we did a count, I think we were at 967 different providers that we've worked with for our clients.
Yeah.
And some of these categories, you know, we're tracking 100 different service providers inside of a category.
Yeah.
And, you know, we're getting inbound every day for more. They're like, oh, you should sell us fill in the blank. What do we do? We're blah, 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 you know, in this category. And you're like, oh, geez. And it's like, we're in that business every day of evaluating providers and making like, and actually checking and doing due diligence and checking capabilities and and sorting the wheat from the chaff, so to speak, right? And it's hard, it's messy,
Hard.
right?
Yeah.
Like it is, and the outcomes are so extremely different, between having a good partner and a good provider in place doing a deployment
Yeah.
versus having a bad one. And you could
Yeah.
have the best technology underneath of it, and if you have the wrong deployment partner, like,
Yeah.
it doesn't matter.
Yeah. Dead right. Dead right. I mean, another great example is ServiceNow. You can do a DIY implementation of ServiceNow, but you know, best of luck with that. Or you can bring in a competent partner and pay them properly and let them do it, and you're probably going to get the business transformation you're looking for
Right.
if you're willing to stand back and get out of the way and let the partner do what what
Right.
they know best. But if you try and DIY it with a couple of internal devs, whew,
So this goes back into, like, you know customer qualification, because a 50-person company doesn't have the resources or budget or understanding necessarily of what it is they're trying to achieve, or why they're trying to achieve it, or what problem they're actually trying to solve, or like what the
yeah,
difference between good and not good really looks like.
yeah,
um, and I find that, our initial indication with a company is, have they moved into enterprise suite of the productivity tool or not yet, right? Like, that's like, for size aside, like if you're 170 people and you've moved from the small business into E3 5 licenses, or you've done the equivalent change within Google Workspace, it's a pretty good signal that, like, you've hit a certain amount of maturity, and you've grown to a certain point where you've gone that. So outside, like, the 300 line barrier, somewhere like that 200 person barrier, we see that transition pretty consistently. But it still is much larger for most companies. It's 500 people, 1,000 people before these really become real issues for them, and you see actual now real investment starting to come down and flow through IT in order to actually improve employee experience, and actually
yeah,
figure out how to improve employee productivity.
yeah, yeah. And we see that all the time. We see organizations do go through stages as they grow and they mature. And we find a lot of IT teams will get to a point where they're constrained by the work they're currently doing. And to get a breakthrough, either they need to add lots of new people to be able to take on additional work, or they need to be able to automate and offload things that they should no longer be doing.
Mm-hmm.
And we see actually the greatest gains are in that space. Or the other thing we see is people are doing drudge work that they've been doing for years. They really want to move on. They have the intellectual capacity and curiosity. They want to move on and start working, say, with AI, enabling AI in the business, and
Mm-hmm.
putting the right framework in place for security and building agents and all that. But they're weighed down by the drudgery that they've inherited from their predecessors. They've still got GPOs they're managing images, they're still resetting passwords, they're still taking every new machine out of the box, they're
Patch management.
patch management, they're doing all that.
Mm-hmm.
And so we often come in and say, this year, we're going to set a goal. We're going to remove three things. We're going to remove all passwords. We'll go passwordless. So you'll never again reset a password. And for the one password your end users will keep, they'll have self-service password reset. So we're going to remove password management or password resets as a category of IT tickets. Secondly, we're going to implement zero-touch provisioning across all the five kinds of endpoints, get all the plumbing in place with autopilot and platform single sign-on, Apple Business Manager, Android, so you never again have to take a device out of the box. That's the end user's privilege. They'll be the first person to ever touch that shiny new device. And thirdly, we'll automate the five kinds of patching: the OS, the firmware, the drivers, all the Microsoft applications, and all the third-party apps like Chrome and Adobe that get updates every week. Now your life is different because you're no longer having to do that drudge work that weighed you down for years. Now your head is clear and your calendar is clear to go and start thinking about tomorrow and what does the business really need from us.
That is it's like such a it's the shiny city on the hill for IT. Like
Yeah,
those three things. I mean, you really, if you break it down, you start talking about it. Anybody who's in an IT world, or managing IT teams, or dealing with any sort of employee whatever, right? Like, it sounds so basic. Oh, we can have employee self-managed passwords. It's like, that is so hard to get deployed properly and well inside of a company. It's crazy. Like, it's And
Yes and no. I'm going to debate this one with you, Max,
okay.
because I think this is a leadership issue, not a technology issue. Truly, I think it's a leadership issue. And I think if company leaders recognize and accept that passwords were an amazing invention back in 1961, but now in 2026, they're the single biggest reason for all the breaches and hacks and compromises that happen. If they accept that fact, and that every time we ask an employee or require an employee to type a password, it's like asking your kids to run across a busy road.
Mm-hmm.
We're taking a risk every time we have to type a password. It's a colossal risk because we don't know what surveillance software is on our phones or our devices, grabbing that password.
Mm-hmm.
So I believe leadership, non-technical leadership in companies have to make the decision. We are going passwordless. And that then cascades down to a couple of business decisions, not technical, but business decisions to say, we will only buy applications that have single sign-on. We're not going to buy apps that don't have single sign-on. And we're only going to buy hardware that has an infrared camera. So now we can do biometric authentication to the device, or if it's a MacBook, we have the fingerprint. So we're only doing biometric authentication to the OS. And now we can do single sign-on to all our apps because we've been buying apps that are SSO enabled. And we've got MFA, fish-resistant MFA turned on for everybody. And now we join those things together with conditional access policies. Boom, you are passwordless.
Okay. Now it's my turn, right? Because
Yeah.
you said you've done two key things, right? You transitioned from IT into leadership and then
Yeah.
specifically non-technical leadership.
Yeah,
And then you immediately follow that up with a slew of acronyms
I
that
did.
most non-technical leadership has any idea even exists, let alone what it means.
Okay.
Right. So now, okay, this is great. I love this part. How do we bridge the gap between IT and non-technical leadership to explain the value and importance of these acronyms? And forget the acronyms. Let's just
Yeah,
use
yeah, yeah.
outcomes, right?
Basically. Okay.
Like I don't care that like MFA does this. It's like, what are they actually getting as a result of it that they
Yeah,
understand, right?
yeah,
But I think this is a key unlock, right? How do we get from IT into non-technical leadership that
yeah.
has to then say, we want to do this, go make this happen now?
And I'll tell you how we typically do it. We do it by referring to the example that everyone else is already using. So most execs have an iPhone, and most of them already have Face ID turned on,
Mm-hmm.
which basically is biometric authentication to the operating system, to iOS.
Mm-hmm.
And then the iOS platform has a whole bunch of apps which have SSO, single sign-on. And if they're trusted by the operating system, you immediately can go into those apps. So if you open Apple native email or anything like that, you're immediately signed in. You don't need to put in a password. So now we've shown two things: biometric authentication to the platform, and then automatic pass-through authentication to the application. Now, if you try and get into your banking app, that might ask you for a second factor to be sure that this is the real Max and you are in Dallas, and you do a second factor, a prompt, or a code, whatever. Everybody understands that example I just shared. We're just replicating that on a Windows machine or a MacBook. So sit in front of your Mac, you open up your laptop, sit in front of it, scans your face, 300,000 data points, makes an instantaneous decision. This is the real Max. And we can do AI matching and say, yes, there's a very high probability this is Max. If we're unsure, ask him to type in a 6-digit PIN to verify. But most cases, it will sign you in based on your face. And then we should hopefully have single sign-on into Outlook and Teams and OneDrive and all those things. And maybe Bamboo or Salesforce or ServiceNow or all the SaaS applications you're using to run your business. And then if you're doing something tricky or more secure, maybe then you need a second factor to verify that you need elevated access to something super secure. I feel like that example, starting with the iPhone and Face ID, which everybody gets, is the best way to bridge the gap between getting a leadership mandate. It's really a mandate from leadership to say to the IT team, go passwordless and make it happen in the next 18 months.
Mm-hmm.
That's the language I like to hear.
So then in that case, really what you're talking about is encouraging the IT team to walk to the leadership team and say, we want to create an iPhone experience across our environment, and we need your
really
help
good.
in order to push this.
That's
push
really
this through.
good. I might use that language going forward. I like that.
The amount of very savvy computer people right? And I'll use crypto. The amount of people involved in the crypto space that have had phishing attacks, account
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
takeovers, APOs, impersonation, and lost lots and lots and lots of money in their crypto that like have gone public. And these are savvy people, right? Like you think about it, like probably like the savviest level of people that you can think of are vulnerable and are actively exploited with this. And I say this not in a negative light. You know, I think about this a lot with my wife, for instance, who is not a tech. You know, she's tech native because of her age, and she lives on her iPhone, but her relationship with the technology is always very strained, I would say. And I look at it like it feels almost impossible to protect her from the internet on her device because of what's actually going on. And then I think, and then you take that kind of that mentality and that feeling for me, and then I say, okay, now walk this into an enterprise with 5,000 employees that you are hiring, you know, onboarding, offboarding, you know, 10, 15, 20% at whatever interval, right? Because, you know, none of these environments are static, that you have to go through and you have to do the same thing for them. And there was this misconception for a long time that like the users were, you know, it's like the users were the threat factor, but it's like it's just too good. You know, like an AI is just going to make this even harder for people to figure out like what's a real email, what's a bad email, what's a good website, what's a bad website. Put your password in here. Don't put your password in there. Oh, I was doing the right thing. I didn't call ID. You know, like I feel like we need to like check ourselves here and have this understanding of like this is going to get really bad, like really really bad.
It is, and I'll share something with you. Our VP of technology was up in Redmond, I think the last week of January for a week with Microsoft, and he came away with some different language that I hadn't heard before. And his language was, you know, we're at a point now where going cloud and going cloud native is no longer optional.
Mm-hmm.
Because for the last few years we've been talking about, you know, hybrid joined for identity or co-managed for endpoints, and you know, all these kind of hybrid scenarios. And he came away saying, we're very quickly moving away from that. We have to go cloud native. And the reason is all the attack vectors that you just talked about, they're all AI enabled.
Mm-hmm.
So that the bad actors are using AI to basically drive all these attacks, whether it's phishing or smishing or whatever, they're all AI enabled. And in response, Microsoft and everybody else, CrowdStrike and Palo Alto and everybody else is using AI in the defenses, right? It's natural. So they're all investing a lot of money and time and all their best talent into building AI capability in all the defensive tools. That's all going into the cloud, the modern cloud tools. None of that AI investment is going into the on-prem legacy tools that were installed in the last century.
Mm-hmm.
And so the conclusion from that is every day we continue to rely on on-prem infrastructure is a day we're drifting further and further away from best practice. And so any organization that's still relying on AD to authenticate to their legacy apps or SCCM to manage their devices or push out their applications, we're telling them you need to go. You need to set an end of life date. Microsoft haven't given us a date yet. They will. Just like they did with Windows 10, they gave us a rundown, they gave us a date, and they didn't blink. Right? They didn't blink. They didn't move the date. They followed through. It was 14th of October, 2025. They will give us a date for SCCM. They will give us a date for AD and all these things and shut them down eventually. But for me, it can't come fast enough because seeing clients still rely on legacy on-prem infrastructure that will never get AI defenses, they become defenseless against all the smart bad bastards out there that are using AI against us.
Yeah. You know, you say passwordless. I love passwordless authentication. I actually really like passkeys. I mean, I know a lot of security people that hate passkeys because they hate the implementation. And it's like, it's more good than bad for me in my view.
Way
right.
more good. Way more. Yeah.
And it's just, I talk about this a lot and I think about this a lot and then the elevating security for the average enterprise and what it actually takes and what the experience is, right?
Yeah.
And how do you actually express this? And there's all these different things. It's like the cyber maturity model or the this model or the that model. And like, nobody, like security practitioners have started out by creating impossible to understand definitions to non-technical, non-security people to then try to classify like where they actually want to be. And I have a friend and he explained it like, you know, protect your users, protect your devices, and protect your network in that order, right? And it's kind of like anything you can do. And also, you know, just in the IT load, if you're not doing patch management anymore, you're not doing password resets anymore, you're not doing device provisioning and reclamation anymore, like you actually have time to look at other things.
You
like,
do have time.
you know,
Yeah.
you can take care of it.
And I would have said those three things you mentioned, protect your users, your devices, your network, was perfectly legit and valid and comprehensive until about 2 years ago when LLMs turned our world upside down. Now the data
Yeah.
is, most of the conversations I'm having with CISOs and CIOs every day are less now about their identity, which has become, the perimeter, less about the endpoint, because most people are getting that under control, less about all the traditional defenses with Defender and whatever, more about tools like Purview to understand first, where the hell is our data? Where is it? How much of our important data is locked up in some legacy on-prem file store? How much is in different cloud applications? And scanning the data to figure out what are all the data assets that have some form of sensitive content, social security or whatever.
Data classification. Yep.
Yeah, and what's the size of our data risk estate, and then figuring out how do we get that into a single place or consolidate it somehow and apply sensible classifications or categorizations to it, and how do we then apply sensitivity labels, and how do we protect against ourselves, insider risk. So the conversation has very quickly shifted towards data as being the next frontier for security.
The conversation with a CTO, a CIO, a CISO, it's technical, its capabilities, speeds and feeds, features and benefits. Usually, they, for the most time, you're probably in a conversation that's, we kind of know what we need, we just don't know what to do or how to get there, right? Like you're usually at that level. When you're talking with non-technical leadership, let's say you're in a room with a board, for a good sized company. We'll define this too much. That's not a technical conversation. That's not we're going to enable MFA conversation. What would you want, like in an ideal case, like what are you trying to express to them or explain to them, or you want them to like leave that meeting like with an imprint, of not like, oh, we need to go out and go ZTNA, right? Because they're not, like who cares? But what is the takeaway that you're hoping that conversation leads to?
I would always frame it in terms of the end user's experience, the experience we want to give their end users. And the way, and I know you're kind of angling towards security here. The way I think about security is what can we take away? What can we hide? We work with a notion called invisible security. And so what we're always trying to do is figure out what we can hide from the end user, because the more security is in their faces and intrusive, and it's just creating friction. So we love taking things away. And so a good example I give, if I was talking to a non-technical board, is back in the last century, they built all these corporate resources to have the notion of a domain. And if you came into the office, you were on the domain and you had certain privileges that you wouldn't have at home. Well, that's gone now. We just assume that people can work remotely off the domain. We're using zero trust, blah, blah, blah. So the domain can go away. We can forget about that. Let's take that one off the table. And then we used to have lots and lots of different passwords. Well, if we have a good passwordless strategy, we'll get down to one, and ultimately we get to none. And so we're getting rid of all that friction with passwords. We take those away. Then we used to have to maintain all these corporate images, the golden image of our build with our firmware and all that. Well, now with dynamic builds and automated provisioning, that goes away. and we can simply dynamically assign the things the new employee needs. So somebody new starts in HR on Monday, they should get the folders, the files, the applications, the permissions, the policies, the access rights for their role.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're making that setup process easy. And we're removing also the need for that user to fire off a bunch of tickets to say, hey, can I get access to this folder? Hey, can I get access to this Adobe suite? Hey, can I get access to this thing? We know what job the person's doing. We should freaking know what applications they need to do their job. And they should be part of the build from day one. So we should be able to take that noise away. When we simplify all the software updates, we should be able to take away the need to reset machines. Like, I don't know if you know about Hot Patch, but the ability to push out updates to a Windows machine without doing a restart. Amazing. So again, we're just hiding friction. We're taking it away. You've got an up-to-date machine without forcing a restart in the middle of your day.
I think this is the... First off, invisible IT, I mean, is fantastic, right? I've used this language, and I love that you said it, right? Because it's so true. The thing that's so funny to me is single sign-on is actually loved by end users because they only have to keep track of one thing, right? It makes their life easier. It's easier. They have to sign in once they're done. It's amazing. Hot patching, if you walk to anybody who's ever used a Windows computer and told them that they never have to sit through a Windows update ever again for the rest of their life, their reaction would probably be to kiss you. You're right. Like, there would be such a visceral moment of joy in their life of like, you don't have to worry about being in a board presentation and your computer going through, what's that, the movie? The
install.
But it's so, it's so, and it's
so real.
I love the reframe always back to the end user experience.
That's the lens. That's our lens. It's, thinking about a day in the life of the end user. What are we imposing on them? What are we asking them to do? What pain are we projecting on them to do their jobs? And the more we can strip things away and remove the friction, the better they can get on with their jobs and the better we look.
That's the thing. I can't think of a better note to end on. I appreciate this. Is fantastic. I love talking about this stuff and getting new information from people in the trenches.
Thank you. We love doing what we do and love working with you guys as partners, and thank you for the opportunity.
That's it for this episode of Signed. If you got something out of this, share it with someone in your world who's staring down a tech decision. A CIO, a CFO, a founder, a procurement lead, whoever. That's how the show grows. Everything from today lives at itbroker.com/podcast. Show notes, transcript, links to anything we mentioned. If you're in the middle of a real tech decision right now and you want someone in your corner without the vendor bias, that's what we do at itbroker.com. Schedule a call on our website. Buy tech without regret. I'm Max Clark. Thanks for listening. See you on the next one.